In discussion yesterday, I was talking about the difference between the narrative and the work, right? So, one of the things I talk about at length on this channel is what is your work or what I'm working on, what's coming off for me, what that may be tied to, the things I'm looking at. So, how do you know if you're when you're in the midst of all of this personal work, how do you know if you're getting stuck in the story of it? Now, if you're early on in the process, the actual literal journaling or speaking aloud, one of the things that I do is I actually speak aloud into my voice recorder. And so I can listen to it back and hear the sound of my own voice tell the story to start to kind of really dig into the places where I hear the changes, the actual changes that you can hear in your voice and the pitch and all of those things. Um, and so the first thing that must happen is you must tell the narrative. You must tell the story because you need context, right? You need the frame of reference. You need how old you were when this thing, maybe when you think the root started, or you need to tell the episode that's bringing up the feelings that then you'll dig into and say, oh, this is part of my root wound of X, right? But you do have to tell the narrative. I think that what happens sometimes, and it definitely happens to me, is that you can get stuck in that narrative and you think that the details of the story, meaning the actual story part of the story, is the work. And that's not true. That's the ego keeping you safe from actually seeing what the work is. The story is always the conduit and the delivery system of what the real work is underneath. And the real work underneath is almost always tied to an old wound within you. Most of my wounds, if not all of my wounds, come from very deeply embedded in me, and I learned them as a child. 0 to 7, right? That's when I learned the wounds that were either mine or they were modeled for me, so I took them on as mine. So as you unravel the narrative and you dig in underneath what, so one of the things that I've always challenged myself to do, and I challenge the people that I work with, is I ask them, what are the 7 lies that you are carrying around about yourself? And the other thing I want to tell you is that those lies don't go away. You're able to recognize when you're telling one, but they don't go away. They do not leave you. And it's important that they don't leave you because there's gold in your trauma, always. As long as you process it. Unprocessed trauma is not gold, but it's in there. So to get back to the story versus the work is not just, here's how I feel like, for me, I know that I'm touching something different than just the story. First of all, it stops being just the little tale of when I was little this happened. If you're stuck in telling the story of when I was little this happened, you're not doing the work. You're telling the narrative story of the elements that led to this traumatic experience. The step beyond the personal is to bring in the balm of God. I believe. I believe that your work must have an access that goes to something bigger than you. And you can use whatever word for God you want. I use God. And then the next step is to take that personal wound and understand that it's probably has to do with a generational wound and that it's not just yours. And that maybe you are charged with healing that wound for your family, for your ancestors, because you will heal them retroactively. So it stops being personal, although that's certainly your entry point. And I'm not saying that wound goes away personally either. It becomes the touchstone to keep doing the work on that. I guess the distinction that I just want to be really clear about is The narrative story that describes the details of whatever occurred is not the same as processing the root cause and the feelings underneath it. And the deeper that you can get to those root feelings underneath it and bring it to the light and see it for all its shadow and all its light, the real raw truth, with which often is quite ugly and probably does not paint you in the most beautiful of lights, but exposing it and then understanding that yes, it is your story to work on, it's your work, but it's also probably not only your work. Very, I'm sure it's some part of it. You've inherited this. And because you're watching this now, you have been elected to be that change for your family and your generations, both following you and the ones that have come before. It's not for the faint hearted. But if you take up that mantle, you are a hero. And I offer you my honor in that. And I will see you tomorrow.